When did you sort of first bump into the people that they refer to as the Essex Boys?
So there's a big myth about Tate, right? He came out of prison in, I think it was June or July 94, and he was in a cafe in Southend.
Oh, obviously there was that famous death at Raquel's, the Leah Betts.
He went, Bernie, you're not going to believe who I've got to play you in this film. I thought he was going to say Barry off EastEnders, right? So I had this big bread knife thing, and I said to my mother, I'm going to go in there when he's asleep and kill him, you know what I mean? She got this guy to go into Raquel's to buy the pills. She wasn't even in the club.
You haven't mentioned, obviously, Carlton Leach at all. I know you and him have never seen eye to eye.
His phone is picked up at Rettendon, right, off the transmitters, for people jumping through the window during interviews to escape. They were being thrown through the windows and murdered by the police.
Would you say that that weekend with those 3 events, do you think that was the beginning of the end?
So I want to say a big thank you to all their sponsors for making this podcast happen. Without you, we wouldn't be here. Stargaze Entertainment, thank you so much. These guys are hosting celebrity events up and down the country, giving you the opportunity to get up close and personal with your favourite celebrities. Pure CBD, your natural path to wellness and balance. Dream Mentoring for all your mentoring needs. If you need some positivity in your life, Tom Smith is the man. And finally, to Carlton Leach Solicitors, the UK's leading criminal law firm, to help get you out of any tricky situations you may find yourself in after watching this podcast. To find out more about any of their sponsors, click on the links in the description below.
Hi, this is Terry Stone, and welcome to episode 1 of the Criminal Connection podcast. Today, we've got a very special guest. This is the first time in his life that he's actually agreed to do a podcast. So I'm honoured that Mr. Bernard O'Mahony is joining us today. So thanks for coming on, Bernie.
Thank you, Terry, thank you.
You know, we've sort of been in touch for many years. And I think, you know, obviously there's a lot of stuff on the internet. There's lots of stuff online. There's lots of people saying different things. But I think, you know, for anybody who knows your name or has read your books, I think they'd actually like to actually know a little bit about you. So, you know, where was you born, Bern?
I was born actually in the street. My mother collapsed in the street in Graham Road, Dunstable, Bedfordshire.
Right, okay.
I'm not a Brummie bee. I was actually born in Luton, as most people address me as. My father worked in the Vauxhall car factory there, and both my parents are Irish. When I was about 6, he got a job in Staffordshire, a place called Codsall, which is a suburb of Wolverhampton.
Right, okay.
And then we moved up there, and I was kind of dragged up there, really. But it's only like it's like a large village, but it's not an inner city place, you know what I mean? It's quite a nice village, so.
So you pretty much you grew up, you know, in Birmingham.
That in the Midlands, yeah.
In the Midlands.
Yeah.
And then obviously growing up when you was at school, was you sporty, or did you box, or did you know?
Well, I think the police and the military would describe it as a hostile environment. My father, for what, you know, when he was born, he's a product of he was born out of wedlock in the 1930s in Southern Ireland. And so he was seen as, you know, child of the devil type thing. And the minute he was born, he was taken from his mother and brought up in workhouses, which were a big thing in the 30s and the 20s and all that. And so he had no childhood, and he had a brutal childhood, and he really resented my mother showing us affection. He was extremely violent, the most violent person I've ever read about, seen, heard in my life. Wow. He didn't care what he hit you with or stuck in you or whatever. And because of that, I used to go to school like a bomb waiting to go off. I resented the other kids' happiness, and my dad did this, and so I always ended up fighting. So, you know, the only qualification I got at school was my red swimming badge.
Right. Yeah, because it's funny, because like when I grew up, my dad was similar to that, but it doesn't sound as bad as your dad. You know, my mum and dad sort of split up, and then I ended up, you know, taking up boxing. And you know, that's because I was getting bullied at school and stuff, and then I started to bully the bullies. So it's interesting. So, but you never did any boxing or anything. You just fought.
My youngest son Paddy does now,
right?
But because it's a great thing for kids, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
to instil that discipline. And you don't get boxers going around pubs. You might get the odd one, but generally they're well behaved and know how to conduct themselves. So it's a good thing to put kids into. But I just went along with the flow, really, just attacking people and getting in trouble. And it's funny because when you're young, the teachers are going, you'll never be any good. The police are going, you'll never be any good. You'll never be any good. But because you're rebellious and attacking the system, attacking the teachers, attacking the police, there's a crowd of little kids behind you going, oh, he's proper, he's a nutcase, he's a great guy. So you've got like a following of people, like a gang, if you like. So all this thing the adults are telling you is that you'll never be any good. You think, well, you can't be right because all these people think I'm marvellous, do you know what I mean? Right. And you find the worse things you do, the more adoration you get from your pals, you know what I mean? You know, you start doing worse things, and because you're so young, you don't realise you're actually destroying yourself.
Yeah, you're kind of becoming a product of your environment.
Yeah, and you're destroying yourself, which is quite sad, really, for when you're older and you look back. But that's the way it was, and, you know, I left home when I was 16 for my mother's sake, really, because I was going to kill my father. I said to my mother one night on the stairs, he was asleep in bed, and he'd beat my mother up, so I had this big bread knife thing, and I said to my mother, I'm going to go in there when he's asleep and kill him, you know what I mean? And she was going, oh, Bernard, don't, you know, and she stopped me, but I definitely would have done it. And I wasn't bothered because the way we lived, do you know what I mean? I wanted him gone. So eventually I just left when I was 16, and I went to the motorway, the M6 motorway. I said to myself, the first lorry or car what stops, that's where I'm going to live, right? And just my look, I ended up in Glasgow. And I always remember I went in this job centre, and the guy behind the desk said to me, he's calling me Dick Whittington, right? He said, you're at the wrong end of the motorway, Dick Whittington. He said, there's no work here. And I was on the streets in Glasgow for about 3 months. I went to Dundee, and these church people kind of took me in, and I was working in this sort of bedsit land place, like a bit of an hotel type thing, and went from there, really. I got into more trouble and more trouble, and there was a really sort of wily old stipendiary magistrate in Wolverhampton called Robert Smythe. Right. And I knew I was going to go to prison, so I thought, I'll come up with this great idea. I'll go in the army recruiting office, and I'll say I'm going to join. I'll get all the papers, and next time I'm in court, I'll say to Smythe, I'm joining the army. So I went to court with all the papers, and I said, if you know, he's going to send me to prison. I said, yeah, but I'm going to join the army. So he said, give me these papers. And he's like, looked at the papers, he looked at me, and he went, he said, right, what we'll do, you're joining the army on January the 8th, say. He said, I'm going to adjourn this case till January the 31st. And if you're in the army on that date, right, fine. If you're not, come back here and bring your toothbrush. That's what he said. So I had a choice, join the army or go to jail, and I joined the army.
Have you ever been in jail, Bernie?
Yeah, quite a few times.
So if you compared the army to the jail, would you say it's similar, or would you prefer one to the other? Similar
type of people inhabit both places, but the army's much preferable because you've got your freedom and, right, you know. So what did you? If you kill someone, you don't get into trouble. Right.
So did you have what part of the army did you join?
Well, all my family, as I said, my mother and father were Irish, and my father was a Republican, right, as most Irish people are. And in the north, on the border area in Ireland, that's where all my family are from, and they're all, right, staunch Republicans. And so when they heard I was going in the army, they weren't pleased. Right. So I joined an Irish regiment, right, the 5th Inniskilling Dragoon Guards, which is tanks. So I thought, well, hey, I'm sound. But as soon as I joined, the army had this brainwave to change the policy of not sending Irish regiments to Ireland. Right. And they said, we're going to send an Irish regiment, and the first Irish regiment to go will be your regiment. Right. So they sent the Inniskilling Dragoon Guards, which was full of Irish people, to Inniskilling in Fermanagh at the same time as Bobby Sands, who was the MP, went on hunger strike. Right. It was a recipe for disaster, honestly. Right. It was horrendous. But I quite enjoyed it, to be honest.
How long was you in there for?
In the army, 3 years. Wow. And when I left the army, I joined the UDR, the Ulster Defence Regiment, because I moved to Northern Ireland when I left. but they kind of sussed out who I was pretty quickly, and I got removed by the RUC, the police, and brought back to this country.
And did you? How many people did you kill in the army?
Nobody.
Oh, right, okay. So you thought, oh, it'd be great, I can kill people and get away with it, but you didn't.
No, I didn't think I didn't think that. That was a joke. But,
no, I'm joking.
But I loved it because when they're training you and shouting at you and calling your names, everyone was going, this is terrible. I was used to it. It was like and half as bad as my dad. Do you know what I mean?
Wow.
And so that didn't really bother me. But I love the idea of, when you went out the door, there was 6 of you or 8 of you onto the streets. And it was like you 6 against whatever they're going to throw at you, do you know what I mean? So there was a lot of camaraderie and a lot of, some really bad things that happened. A guy I knew got blew up. It was quite funny, but it was when I look back, I couldn't remember his name.
Right.
And this mortar had gone off and it hit him in the side and his face and his neck. And he was blue. He was badly injured. And the only thing I could find in the darkness for bandages was socks.
Right.
So I was stuffing his wounds in his face. He had all socks sticking out of him. And when the helicopter come to pick him up, we picked him up. And you've got a road, a ditch and a hedge.
Right.
And the idea was to pass him over this hedge. But they got his clothing or bandages or something caught on the edge.
Right.
So when they picked him up and run with him, he was catapulted off the stretcher back over the edge, back down on top of us.
He really wasn't having a good day, was he?
No, it was a bit of comedy of errors.
Right.
And that's what the army was like. I mean, our regiment shot more of its own soldiers than it did of the enemy. Do you know what I mean?
Wow.
In accidents.
I mean, it's just mad. The whole thing's crazy. I mean, I've got a few friends who've been in different armies, regiments and stuff, and I think to understand that sort of dark humour, you have to actually be in it because, to somebody else, watching this, they'd be going, oh, there's nothing about that, the guy's hurt. But obviously when you're there and like you're saying, you're stuffing the socks in someone and you're trying to pull him over, I think lots of people, especially when you're under stress, like somebody's just been blowing up and these terrible things are happening. And, you sort of, it's like a laugh out of sort of horror, you know what I mean? It's not a laugh as in...
But it's shock, because I could clearly remember this. We were in a thing called the QRF, Quick Reaction Force. If something happened, someone was shot or someone... They'd pick you up in a helicopter, they'd take you there and you'd be there like in minutes and you'd land in the middle of chaos, do you know what I mean? And I always remember that night when we landed, I was thinking the police will be here in a minute, the emergency services will be here in a minute, what we're going to do. And it suddenly dawned on me, we were the fucking police, we were the emergency services. You think, what can we do? Do you know? And the place is burning and total darkness and bullets going off because it was like a substation, police station that mortared, that bombed it. So it's just really chaotic.
And that, I mean, from your sort of 3 years in the army, what lessons would you say, you took from it? Because like everybody gets different things from things. I mean, did you think it give you any values or any qualities that you may not have had when you sort of joined? Yeah,
definitely. It just wises you up so much. You know what I mean? Right. You appreciate how fragile life is and how easy it can be took away. And I mean, even now, I was in South America last week. We was in some dodgy places, in Peru especially, and you just got that awareness of that place. You can't explain it. Don't go to that place there because it don't feel right. Do you know what I mean?
I mean, that's one thing. I think lots of sort of soldiers, police enforcement, doormen, security people, they kind of have that sixth sense and that awareness. And I don't think you can learn it. I think you just have to be put in those situations to actually sort of activate it. And then I think whenever you're going around, it's sort of something sort of pings up, subconsciously or...
Well, when I left the army, I wounded somebody, went to prison, and then I wounded someone else and was going to go to prison.
Right.
I thought, no, I just don't want to go back to prison. I'd been there for 4 or 5 months. So I went on the run. I ended up in South Africa.
Right.
And me and this lad from Stratford in East London went to join their army to fight on the border with Namibia.
Right.
We thought it'd be good for some reason. I don't know why. And we went in this recruitment office in Pretoria. And the guy behind the desk, this major, he was nearly crying. He was going, I can't believe English people want to sign up when all the South Africans are on doing a runner, because they've got conscription there. And he said, show us your papers. He said, you've only got an holiday visa.
Right.
So he said, we can't help you. He said, but there's a new thing started in Johannesburg.
Right.
This is a Cockney, funny enough, and a Rhodesian have started their own private police force. They're quite common in America now.
Right, okay.
Say like a street, they'll pay, it was £5 a month then, which is nothing. And you got a triangle with a phone number on it, and you put it in your window. Because the police were useless, they would ring this number if anything happened, and they'd guarantee armed people would be there within minutes.
Right.
So it's not a big thing in America now, but they started it in South Africa. So we went and worked for them, for these people, and that is the most scariest thing I've ever done in my life. Watch the Louis Theroux programme about policing in South Africa,
right.
And he does a programme with these people we work with. They go into townships,
right.
the most horrendous situations ever, where you might have 1,000 or 500 people in the township, get round 3 of you, and they all want to kill you, do you know what I mean? Or it's really, really scary. I mean, there's a street in Johannesburg, in Hillbrow, and they called it the murder mile. There was people getting there murdered every other day of the week, you know what I mean?
I remember somebody said to me that when you buy a car in South Africa, you can actually have
the flames, yeah, you can, yeah.
fitted, and I thought it was a joke. When I Googled it, I was like, this is actually a real thing.
Someone in the village might have a dream about another person, and then they decide that they're a witch or something, and they'll have them arrested. They put a tie around their neck, they call it a necklace, and then they burn them, you know, and that happens it was happening all the time.
It's not somewhere I'm thinking of moving to.
No.
Wow.
Some of the township trouble we went to, they have shebeens, which are illegal drinking dens.
Right.
And there was like this big fight in there. And there's a guy, when we got there, and he actually had a screwdriver in the top of his head. And he was walking around the road, you know, going, oh. And the police come and just drove into him, like knocked him down, picked him up and just chucked him in the back and drove off. That's sort of how they operate.
Just a normal, everyday thing.
You can't describe how violent it was then.
Wow.
Because Mandela was just on his way, you know, he wasn't out then.
Right.
But it was all the trouble leading up to it, do you know what I mean? It was really, really bad.
And then after that, I mean, how long was you there?
Well, I got put in prison out there.
Right.
This Rhodesian guy had a brainwave that he would then put these armed security people in nightclubs.
Right.
And you had a single barrel shotgun, a handgun, CS gas, handcuffs and a baton working on the door. And these Portuguese people came, and the manager of the club was a Greek.
Right.
And it was like a bikers club. And about 11:30 at night, he decided that no one was allowed in with jeans. And then he decided everyone in the club with jeans had to leave as well, and it caused murders. Ended up having a big fight with him, and I got stabbed in the chest by this Portuguese guy, and they went away. It wasn't bad. It wasn't good, but it wasn't bad. And in the flat I lived in on the 13th floor, went home, it was about 5 in the morning, opened the lift doors, and they're all outside this woman's house, these Portuguese people.
Right.
So it's kicked off again. We used to take the weapons home with us, and I'd hit him with I'd held the barrel of the gun and hit him with the butt of the gun across the head. So he was out the game, went to bed, and then about a week later they came to the club again, and just all hell let loose. Police come and they arrested me because there was quite a few people injured.
Right.
And they discovered I was on a holiday visa.
Right.
Not impressed. And John Foster Square, if you look it up in Hillbrow, is notorious.
Right.
Right. There's 10 floors, I think, if I remember. And there's 11 floors, but the lift only goes to the 10th.
Right.
And people used to get interviewed on the 11th floor, and it became notorious for people jumping through the window during interviews to escape.
Wow.
Allegedly. They were being thrown through the windows and murdered by the police.
Wow.
And it had an horrendous name, and I spent a bit of time in there till they eventually took me to court, and they went to Deepcliff Prison, where they still execute people, 14 people a day or 12 a day. It's not a nice place. Eventually, I come up with this idea that if I got bail, I went into a travel agent and I said, because they took my passport and everything off me, I got bail. And I went into the travel agent and I said, I want a ticket to Europe. She went, where? I said, anywhere, just as soon as possible. So she got me on to Luxembourg or something the next day, right? So I then had the ticket and I drove to Pretoria, which is like 3-hour drive.
Right.
went into a police station. I said, my sister's married a South African. She's gone back to England and I'll come over to help her pack and everything. And my flight's tomorrow and I'm looking for my passport. I think I've packed my passport in her gear and it's been transported back to England. What can I do? And I knew what he was going to say. And he went, you'll have to report it lost.
Right.
So he gave me an official letter saying I'd reported it lost. It was all stamped and everything.
Right.
Took it to the British Embassy. Said, I've lost my passport. And they said, we'll give you an emergency passport, which is an A4 piece of paper, which allows you one journey. My backside was eating through my trousers when I was at the airport the next day, you know. And I sat on this plane and eventually it took off and I thought, thank God for that. But I'd gone to Africa because I was on the run from England for glassing the guy. I was going to go to prison. Whilst I was in Africa, I'd met this girl from Basildon called Deborah, who was an hairdresser.
Right.
We weren't in a relationship, but we kind of liked each other.
Right.
So she said, I'll meet you at Dover, because I had to get the ferry once I landed in Europe.
Right.
So I've come up this ferry, it was November, right? Freezing cold.
Right.
Airy-arsed lorry drivers with carrier bags with cigarettes and whiskey and duty-frees. I had 3 suitcases. I was black as anything with the sunburn from Africa. And all I had was this A4 piece of paper. So I'm walking towards the customs. I think, I know you're going to pull me. I know you're going to pull me. He went, where have you been? I showed him the passport. He went, Johannesburg, and you're coming from on the ferry over back to England. I said, yeah. He said, we need to check this out. Next thing, all the detectives there, nicked. I was then sent up to Stafford and sent to prison. And whilst I was in prison, I kept in touch with Deborah. She used to come and see me, and a kind of prison relationship sort of began. And I said, I need an address for my parole.
Right.
And she said, well, use mine in Basildon.
Right.
So I used her address for my parole. And so I had to go there when I left.
Right.
And that's how I ended up in sunny Basildon, Essex. The rest, they say, is history.
Wow. So when you was in Basildon, when did you actually? Did you literally go there and you were looking for work, and that's how you ended up being on the door?
Well, no. I went to Basildon, and when I left the army, I had an heavy goods licence, so I used to drive tipper lorries. Right. When I came out in Basildon, some Irish guys, they were building Canary Wharf at the time. Right. Some Irish guys gave me a job. I don't know if you know Canary Wharf well, but there was massive warehouses built. And because no one would go onto Canary Wharf because the rent was so high, right, they said you can have the warehouse 6 months rent free. Right. So what these Irish guys were doing, they were hiring a warehouse, putting a machine in there, right, coming up the city, loading all the lorries up with soil and crap, rubbish, whatever, driving to the warehouse, reversing in, tipping it up, driving out, shutting the doors, and the machine was stacking it up in the warehouse. They were filling these huge warehouses up with muck, do you know what I mean? So everyone was earning a fortune. So I was on there, but I was leaving at 4:45 in the morning and getting home at 7, 8 at night. It was just slaughtering me, do you know what I mean? And then I read in the newspaper that this little boy from Cotswold, where I was brought up, had been in South Africa and he'd been hit by a car. He's only 10. And his mother was trying to raise money for him, you know, with these usual types of sad stories. So I said, I'll try and help you. So I wrote to everyone I could think of, Madonna, the Rolling Stones, everyone to donate things. And I wrote to the Krays and asked them to donate things. So I'm in the garden one day and Deborah's there's a bloke on the phone, says it's Reggie Kray. So I thought it'd be some idiot from down the pub, do you know what I mean? So I went, all right, Reggie. He's gone, oh, no, and he's dead effeminate the way he talks. Right. You know, he's not what you imagine. He said, I got your letter, and I thought, fucking hell, it might be him, you know what I mean? Right. He said, me and my brother want to help you. You know, so I thought, well, OK, fair enough. So they helped me raise a bit of money for this lad. And then they had something going on, some Frida Krays thing or something. So he asked me if I'd help him, and, you know, you've got to, haven't you? You're obliged to because he's helped you. So then I got to know them too, which was turned out to be a bit traumatic, really. I was telling Reggie about my work situation, and he said, I've got a friend who runs a club in Basildon called Keith Bonzo. It's Club Raquel's. He said, I'll give him a ring, go and see him, and he'll give you some door work, and that way you can spend more time with your family. So I went sound. So that's how I ended up working at Raquel's.
Right, wow. And
As in the film The Origins, kind of.
Right. Yeah. Because
You never read the script, did you, Terry?
No, of course I read it. But I obviously didn't learn all your lines because I was obviously playing.
Yeah, of course,
Danny Tucker.
of
But
course.
When did you sort of first bump into, the people that they refer to as the Essex Boys?
Well, I was at Raquel's from '87, and it's like any local club, really. You've got lads who earn their reputation in the playground and they think they're going to take it to their graves, do you know what I mean?
Right.
So there's local hooligans and local doormen. And the local doormen think, am I really going to get shitty with him for £40 a night? He knows where I live, he'll come round, give... So they let them get away with murder, They'd come in the club, they'd bash someone up, they'd glass them, they'd get thrown out, and then they'd be back the next week, do you know what I mean?
Someone did say to me, I mean, I never went, but someone said it was a little bit like the Wild West, Raquel's.
It was unbelievable, honestly.
Right.
They were either trying to fuck each other or fight each other. That was it,
Right.
A guy went in there on his stag night, and he was getting married at the weekend. Stood on some bloke's foot. That's disrespectful. Pushed him in the fire exit. He had 130 stitches with a Stanley knife. Cut all his back and cut him to pieces. I see horrendous things in there, and they were all getting away with it. So I really, really do like, and I don't mean it as disrespectful. To this day, I think the world of him. The head doorman was a guy called Dave Venables.
Right.
He's got the weightlifting record in the world for the amount of really strong guy, right? But he just couldn't be bothered with taking them on. I used to say to him, look, one war's better than, one every week. Just have one with them, get rid of them. Nah, it ain't worth the bother. They'll be round the house and ringing me up. So this one weekend, there was a lad, I won't name him, and he got thrown out this pub, and one of the doormen hit him and broke his jaw.
Right.
So the next night, these two doormen who work with us are working on this pub. Guys come in the pub with a plumber's bag, sat down having a drink. And another guy's coming, he's sat over there, another guy sat there. There's about 6 of them. Suddenly the guy with the plumber's bag jumped up. He went, fucking do the bouncers. Opened the bag and he's got machetes in there. He's handing out the machetes.
Wow.
So they've attacked the doorman. This guy, Ronnie, had all his hands and arms chopped up. The other doorman's run away, right? So we got called down there, and by this time they've all gone, but we know who they are.
Right.
So I said to David, we got to go and sort this now. It's getting too serious. Leave it with me, right? So on the weekend after, one of the people involved has come in the club, right?
Right.
And they've let him in. So the guy who run away, the doorman who run away, Tim his name was.
Right.
I said to Tim, Ronnie got hurt because of you. It's down to you to confront this person, right? So he's gone in the toilets, this guy has. So we're waiting outside the toilet, and he's come out, and Tim went, you got to leave. And this bloke, a bit of a nutcase, you know what I mean? He went, the only person leaving here is fucking you, and he's picked an ashtray up.
Right.
And I don't know who it was, right? But somebody squirted him
Right.
with this noxious fluid.
Right.
And hit him over the head with a water jug, and he's got bashed up, and he's been permanently blinded in one eye, right, with this fluid, and put out the door. And Dave at that stage has gone, I ain't been involved in this no more, and he's walked out.
Right.
So I was given the door, right? So the company who owned Raquel's, European Leisure, would only accept invoices from legitimate companies, you know what I mean?
Right.
Which I didn't know. And I'd thought for a long time, you can't have local doormen, as good as bad as they were, dealing with these people. You need someone from out the area whose reputation means nothing.
Right.
So you come to the door, don't like your attitude, you ain't coming in.
Right.
If you play up, you're out and you're out for good, that kind of thing, right? I'd started working at Epping Country Club.
Right.
And whilst I was there, I met Tony Tucker, because it was on a Sunday, and it was the kind of place where all the doormen who worked Friday, Saturday, and
Right.
all the bar staff used to go for their nights out, do you know what I mean? And I'd met him there, and he was a nice guy, and he was dead quiet then, you know, a bit growled at a few people, but nice enough guy, do you know what I mean? And I told him the problem I had, and he went, well, I've got a legitimate company, we'll do it together. So shook hands on it, and that's how we started, do you know what I mean?
Right, okay.
Because he had, a lot of people think he had hundreds of doors, he didn't. he was friends with these Greeks who owned the Hollywood's chain. They had Hollywood's Romford, they had Club UK in South London. It wasn't called Club UK at the time then. They had Hollywood's Ipswich. Right. And he was in with these people and he had them doors, you know.
Right.
So I thought that's brilliant because I can get people from Romford, I can get people from Club UK and we can get all out of town doormen. And that's what we did and it worked brilliant. We got rid of all the heroes and Mrs Thatcher brought in the party law, didn't she, to stop outside raves.
Right.
So all the promoters were looking for big venues to put on raves and because all the trouble at Raquel's had essentially stopped, this promotions company, Perfect Virtue, which was Sue Woods and Gary Sutton, I don't remember Gary's, sadly died. They heard it was a change had been made, so they brought rave music into Raquel's. They started there. And
when was that? Was that 89, 1990?
No, early 90s.
Oh, early 90s. Right, okay.
Yeah, early 90s. So it went really well, but then, as you know, I don't think you remember me because I worked at the ministry and you used to do, I think it was a Monday night or something with your...
We did a couple of events at the ministry.
I remember you being there.
Yeah.
But everything works swimmingly at first, but then they're taking 12 pills instead of one.
Right.
And then they're taking other things and then the moods change and then... It all goes to shit, doesn't it?
I mean, obviously, you know, there's lots of books been written about this, and there's obviously been films made about the Essex Boys. I mean, just to sort of dispel some myths. I mean, you know, I know you was obviously working, you know, in conjunction with Tony on that club, but I mean, obviously in the films, he's openly saying, you know, that he was selling drugs, he was doing this, he was doing that. I mean, was openly doing it in there, or
Tucker wouldn't even work.
Oh, really?
He never stood on the door once.
Oh, right. So,
all the time I knew him.
Right. So,
do you know what I mean?
Right,
so,
okay.
As far as selling drugs, no way.
Right.
He's a very, you know, like most people who run crime things, he wouldn't get his hands dirty. Do you know what I mean? He would have people who done it for him, like the guy in Raquel's. He would speak to me.
Right.
I would speak to Tony. Tony would say to me this, that, and the other. So he distanced himself from everybody. Do you know what I mean?
So him, obviously Pat Tate and Craig Rolfe.
Well, things were fine.
Right.
Things were fine, right? Tucker had Rolfe because Rolfe was his driver. He did all his dirty work. He sold gear for him, which worked well for Craig as well, in fairness, because Craig sold drugs long before he met Tucker.
Right.
But he had a good outlet for him, like almost risk-free.
Right.
Do you know what I mean? And he was selling in bulk.
Right.
So it suited him, the friendship did, and it suited Tucker because he never had to get his hands dirty. So there's a big myth about Pat Tate, right? He came out of prison in, I think it was June or July 94.
Right.
And he was in a cafe in Southend with another guy. And Tucker and Rolfe happened to go in the cafe and they knew the other guy, like a mutual friend. And they all got talking and obviously Pat's a big guy, Tony's a big guy, and they got a lot in common with training and steroids. So they got like an house on fire and they invited Tate out with them for a night out in Southend that night.
Right.
And then they got on really well, so then he invited them for a night out at the country club. That's when that fool Ellis went with them.
Right.
That was the nail in the coffin. So just to sum Pat Tate up, right? Pat come out June, July 94.
Right.
He was shot in the November by Ellis. He went back to prison. So June, July, August, September, October. So he's out for 6 months at maximum. He's gone back to prison. He came out in October 95, Halloween night, funny enough. And then he was out for 6 weeks and got shot dead. So he was only on the scene for 7.5 months maximum.
Wow.
And got shot twice by 2 different people.
Wow. You didn't have much luck then?
No, apparently no one likes me. No one's ever shot me. Right. But he got done twice in 7 months.
You know, there's been obviously, as we said earlier, all these sort of films made about these characters. I mean, how I mean, obviously the films are fictionalised, but I mean, if I know when we spoke earlier, you mentioned that you'd watched the first one and you watched obviously the fifth one, which obviously Bernard O'Mahony was obviously one of the main characters.
Yeah. I look a lot like Vinnie, people say.
No, absolutely. but when you got the phone call from Andy and he said, you know, we want to do the Tony Tucker story, we want to obviously get you on board, we want to get someone to play you. Who did you think they was going to cast?
Well, Andy contacted me, and I was immediately concerned because he was laughing in a very good mood.
Right.
And I thought of all the times where I'd slagged his films off. And I thought, this is payback time, right? He went, Bernie, you're not going to believe who I've got to play you in this film. Off here it comes. I thought he was going to say Barry off EastEnders, right? But he went, no, it's Vinnie Jones. I thought, well, fair play to you, you know what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, you've watched, I know you've watched them all, but how accurate would you say the characters are to the actual guys? I mean, would you say they were like that or not?
Tate is spot on, to be fair.
Yeah.
He really, I mean, God rest his soul, you know, and he was a really troubled person, do you know what I mean? A lot of people think they know him from these films, but when he went home, he'd sit there crying. He couldn't cope with anything. He couldn't do it. He was just a mess, do you know what I mean?
Right.
I mean, a lot of people don't know. I forget the guy's name there, Trigg or someone. But he used to go doing gear with homeless people in Southend in an house, do you know what I mean?
Right.
That's how far he'd fell, do you know what I mean? But he was just a mess with drugs.
Right.
So it's quite tragic, really. So there was a packed Tate when he's out, and then there was a packed Tate when he was home, and he was just he used to sit there crying, you know what I mean? So I think Craig Fairbrass looks a bit like him as well, which helps. Craig Rolfe, I think when that first film was made, the guy whose book it was based on, to me, I might be wrong, in fairness to him, he was jealous of Rolfe's relationship with Tucker.
You're talking about Carlton here?
Carlton Leach,
yeah. Right.
Yeah. I don't like to have a go at the bloke, you know what I mean? Right. He does well. He does a good enough job on his own, you know what I mean? He had a problem with Rolfe, I believe.
Right.
And so he had him portrayed as this muggy little runaround.
Right.
Which Rolfe really, he was and he wasn't, do you know what I mean? He was no fool, Rolfe, you know, and he'd cut people, and he was quite an evil person. Like, he tried his brother, he said his brother was a grass, Brian. And so he invited him round his house for a drink, his own brother this is, and he drugged him with various drugs till his brother passed. He punched his brother in the face, his brother passed out. He woke up in a different house, his brother did, and he was on this bed and he couldn't move, he was paralysed, and Craig was laughing at him, and his brother thought he was going to die, and he kept him there 2 days. And
I never met any of these people, and obviously when the first film, obviously Julian Gilby wrote that film and did his research, and obviously got feedback of different people on what these people were like, and I think it's very difficult to get them right, because obviously when we did the Origins thing, you could say to Vinny, this is what I was like, this is what I did. So
but we're all different people to different people, aren't we?
Yeah.
You know, if you ask my kids who am I, they're not going to say who you think I am, do you know what I mean? So we're all different to different people. But Rolfe, that was Rolfe's thing, drugging people. That's how he unfortunately killed Kevin Whitaker. He drugged loads of people, do you know what I mean? And that was his thing. He was quite evil. And Tony Tucker, I forget who played him, but Tony Tucker. But yeah, I mean, you've got to mention the wig, haven't you? I'm disappointed you're not wearing it today, to be honest.
Well, I was going to wear it for you, Bernie, but I just thought you've seen it so many times, you probably got sick of it. So.
Maybe later, sweetheart. But
that's
after
after the podcast. I put the wig on.
Yeah, I thought it was him. I could buy that. Yeah, but I don't know. It's hard to describe Tucker. You know, he would never get his hands dirty. I've never seen him get involved in trouble at the club or anything. Do you know what I mean?
Right.
And he was a bit of a. Well, I think they're all a bit of cowards, really.
Right.
I mean, Nipper Ellis, they went to attack him. There was at least 4 of them there. I'd be ashamed to take my mother to threaten Stephen Ellis, never mind attacking, do you know what I mean?
Right.
You don't need 3 or 4 other big guys to take on Nipper Ellis, do you know what I mean?
Right.
When they robbed the guy at Travellers Checks, there was 8 of them, which they even failed to do. You know, they're always mob-handed, do you know what I mean? And
Right.
I've always shied away from that. When the times I've been to prison, no one's ever stood in the dock with me, ever.
Right.
I've done things, I don't regret what I've done. The 2 prison sentences for gassing people, I was in a pub on New Year's Eve on my own, and this girl walked by crying, and it was my brother's best friend's sister. I asked her what was wrong, and she said, oh, this bloke said I can't leave the pub. I've gone out with him, but he's threatening me. So I went over to him and said, you know, what the fuck you think you do? And he grabbed me by the throat, and so I done him in the neck. Went to prison for that, not a problem. And then another time I was having an argument with someone come over and butted in. I said, please go away, and they wouldn't, so I've never done anything in gang. I've been in gangs, you know what I mean, but I've never done anything significant in a gang. I'd rather do it myself, do you know what I mean?
Right.
And if I can resolve it with someone, I'll resolve it with them without any bother, but I don't like all that 10 against 1, and do you know what I mean?
Oh, obviously there was that famous death at Raquel's, the Leah Betts.
Well, there was 3.
Oh, really? Wow, because you only really... That was the focus, wasn't it? But there's 3...
Kevin Jones died at Club UK, which is took his pills.
Right.
Leah at Raquel's, and Andrew Boys died at Club UK again, which took his pills. The Leah Betts thing is... the story's largely unknown.
Right.
Because people don't want to hear it, you know. She came into the club 6 weeks prior to that fateful night. And I was with Tucker, funny enough.
Right.
And we're sitting upstairs talking about some invoices or some nonsense. And the manager come and he said, can you get down to the bottom bar? There's a problem, right? So me and Tucker went down there, and there's this girl, and she's going, she stole my fucking purse. And the barmaid's going, she's underage, she's got to leave. So I said to the girl, have you got ID? And she went, no, she's got my purse. Because if you ain't got ID, you got to leave. She goes, well, my dad's a policeman, and he's going to cut. I said, listen, I've heard it all before. No offence, you know, but if you ain't got the ID, you've really, your dad will understand, you've got to go, you know what I mean? My dad's this one. So anyway, we put her out, went upstairs, and after work we had a drink, and we're sitting there and we heard all this hoo-ha downstairs. So I run downstairs, and the barmaid's bashed this girl up. The girl's waited for her outside, and the barmaid's bashed her up, right?
Right.
So I sort of broke them up and said to this girl, look after your mate, and she's walked off with her, and the barmaid's gone the other way, and we thought that was it. So then Leah at the time was 17. I didn't know it was Leah Betts then, but that's who it was. When she was young, her mother and father had split up.
Right.
And she'd gone to live in Basildon with her mother and her boyfriend, and they'd brought her up, right? But when she was coming up to 18, her mother had died the year before or something. She died anyway. And she was due some bit of money, not a lot, you know what I mean?
Right.
The father, who's an ex-policeman, lived 25 miles from Raquel's. And he said, for your 18th birthday, you can have a party at my house, right? So she's at college, right? She's turning 18, all her friends are going to come. And he said, but you can't have any alcohol, and me and your stepmom are going to sit in the kitchen while the party's going on. Imagine that when you're 18, you think, what the fuck, you know what I mean?
That's the sort of thing I'd do, because I'd be worried they smash the house up.
So she can't come in Raquel's because she's been barred. So what does she do? She decides we'll get some pills. Because that was the thing in the 90s, do you know what I mean?
It was an epidemic. I mean, I don't know if it was because obviously people were coming out of the recession and just wanted to escape, but, you know, it was
just one of them cycles, isn't it? You know, they come and they go, different fads. Obviously now we're in the keep fit sort of era, do you know what I mean? As you can see. Yeah, so she thinks I can't go in Raquel's with all my pals. I don't want to be embarrassed at my dad's ass, you know. Right. Everyone's sitting there playing hop, skip, jump or something. They want to get hammered, do you know what I mean? Right. It's my 18th birthday. So she got this guy to go into Raquel's to buy the pills. She wasn't even in the club, right? So he's gone in there with his pal, and they got hold of their pills, gone to the party. She's took the pills at her dad's house. People were smoking dope in the house, right?
Wow.
Because the ambulance people said it when they got there. But the dad, an ex-policeman, wasn't aware of it.
Right.
So she took the pills, she's collapsed and gone into intensive care. She didn't die straight away. So I'm the head doorman, and this is some people need to understand. Doormen were licensed then. When the police come to the door, you can't tell them to F off or...
Right.
You've got to converse with them, otherwise they withdraw your licence and you lose the door, right? So you've got to have a degree of conversation with them. So the police come, I'm the head doorman, they want to speak to me, right? We need one of these pills, because we think, the first thought she'd been poisoned. We need one of these pills as quickly as possible so it can be analysed and we might be able to help her.
Right.
The girl's 18, right? No, I went, no, didn't even think about it. No problem, I'll get you one, right? So I tried to get one and I couldn't get one because the guy who sold them...
I was going to ask you, did you charge him for it or was it on you?
No. The guy who owes it, the guy who had them done a run to Spain.
Right.
So the pills are gone. That weekend, unbelievable, right? That weekend, Leah Betts collapsed.
Right.
Tate crashed Tucker's Porsche.
Right.
And the drugs they were then importing from Holland. Right. Steele and Womes got arrested on the beach.
Right.
That weekend. So there was chaos, right? Absolute chaos.
Can I just ask you a quick question? But obviously, as a head doorman that's licensed, if the police obviously come up to the door and said to you, you know, we need to get one of these pills, if you'd have then gotten one, wouldn't that have then implicated you in it? Because obviously they'd have sort of said, well, you...
Well, no, I didn't give a shit, right? There's a child dying in hospital.
Right.
I didn't give a monkeys.
Yeah.
Right?
But
that's me. I'm not going to go, oh, gov.
But I think what you did was the right thing.
Yeah,
what I'm
absolutely.
saying is I didn't know if that would have put you at risk because they'd have said, well, you must have known it was going on because...
Well, I wouldn't care.
Right.
It's a child lying in hospital dying.
Absolutely.
Do you know what I mean?
So you had to do the right thing.
Yeah, and forget all this gangster crap. The child's lying there, you do what you can, you know what I mean? Finish.
Absolutely.
So that's the way I am. So there's a whole load of stuff going on. Raquel's was a nightmare, right? You'd go into the club after she'd collapsed and you'd get people come up to you in raincoats and, can you get me any pills? Can you get me... Reporters and the media. And Tucker's trying to run this drug importation. You're standing on the door. Across the road, you had Sky News, vans, you know, the cameras.
Right.
All these ITV all filming, you're coming up to your microphones. He went, then you've got to get rid of these people. You've got to get rid of them. I said, how the fuck am I going to get rid of them? He went, I don't care how you get rid of them, you've got to get rid of them, right? Because he's invested all this money in this importation. That's going wrong.
Right.
Tate's out of his head, crashing his car and getting drunk, right? So he's thinking, you've got to get rid of it. So I went home and then this night, this guy's rung me, right? He went, you don't know me. I said, what do you want? He said, I've heard you're after me. I said, I assure you I'm not. I said, I don't even know who you are. He said, I've been nicked and I'm on bail for the Leah Betts thing, supplying her. I'm her friend, right? So I said, I don't know why you're ringing me, mate. He said, well, I've heard you're after me.
Right.
So I said, you've heard wrong. So the next day I told Tucker, right, he went, he's been nicked. You're not grassing him, he's been nicked. We need to put him in because the papers weren't aware of who he was or anything.
Right.
So they're still investigating me and Raquel's.
Right.
Tucker wants him to go away. So he goes, I don't care how you do it, but we want him in a newspaper and then the problem will go away. I went, all right, fair enough. So I've rung this kid up, I said, meet me. Rang this journalist, said, the guy who's on bail for the Betts thing is going to meet us.
Right.
They've turned up, photographed him, bang, he's in the News of the World. Tucker's rubbing his hands, the problem's going away. The problem's only just starting, do you know what I mean?
Would you say that that weekend with those 3 events, do you think that was the beginning of the end?
That 100%.
Right.
1,000,000%. I could see it all falling down around me, do you know what I mean?
Right.
I'd been nicked with a gun. I got caught with a gun. And I was going to lose my licence in the December anyway.
Right.
So I weren't that fussed, but Tucker was just... He physically changed, honestly. His face physically changed. He was under that much stress. And having Tate as your right-hand man don't help, do you know what I mean?
Because obviously, you know, I've read the papers regularly, and as I didn't know these people, but obviously you read about this girl dying on, and the way it's portrayed in the press was that obviously, you know, she went in the club, bought a pill, took a pill, and died, you know, so she died, you know, in the club basically, or when she got home or whatever. So, and I'm doing this from memory, so I could have...
Yeah, that's what everyone thinks. Yeah.
Did the club sort of get shut down after that, or did it remain open?
It remained open for a little while.
Right.
The management were denying all knowledge of everything, Krays. Paul Betts, the father, went on TV and said I was a bastard, and he blamed me, right?
Right.
Said it was my fault. Because they said, you must know what was going on in there. And I went, well, yeah, of course I did. Right? I said, but a rave, right, you've got the management producing flyers with smiley faces on. They're not selling alcohol. They're only selling water. You're trying to tell me they don't know what's going on. And you're trying to tell me the police didn't know what was going on. Everyone, you know, 1,000 people bursting out into the street with fucking eyes like saucers. I said, you're trying to tell me the police didn't know what was going on. I said, we all knew what was going on, but that's the way. So then he jumped on me, didn't he, saying it was my fault, which I thought was a bit rich. And I asked for him to do a live thing on TV where we debated it.
Right.
Because people were smoking cannabis in his house.
Right.
And he couldn't smell it.
Wow.
Although he's an ex-policeman.
Right.
It was just it was a tragedy, right? I don't think it was anyone's fault.
Right.
She was doing what millions of kids were doing.
Right.
And it was just a horrible, sad, tragic event.
It's bad. I think it's also bad luck. I mean, you know, I remember when the rave scene first kicked off in the late 80s. And at the time I was sort of boxing, I was running half marathons, I was... you know, I'd go to a club and have a drink, but, you know, I was completely anti-drugs. And when I saw the papers, it was like, you know, people are taking E's and dying on E's. And, you know, and you know, to somebody who'd never been out, you assume if you took one, you die. So I think they did a good job in putting people off. But then I think lots of people were taking them, like millions of people.
A friend took exactly the same.
And then I think as you've got, for everyone who said, oh no, it's dangerous, everyone was going, well, I've taken, I'm all right. And I mean, look, there's been lots of deaths from alcohol, smoking, drinking, you know, over the years. And you know, it's really unfortunate when anybody does lose their life. But
there is a bit of a backstory to them particular pills. This lad was working away in Raquel's and doing reasonably well, selling drugs. And Club UK got raided on TV. It was like televised raid.
Right.
Sorry, before that, the lad was doing well, and the lads in Club UK who took her had got nicked, right, they're from Bristol. So he needed new dealers.
Right.
So he got the guy from Raquel's to go into Club UK with his dealers, right?
Right.
And then there was a televised raid in the October. And they burst in there with TV cameras, police. So all the dealers were just chucking everything on the floor.
Right.
The guy who was at Raquel's Club UK, who worked for Tucker, was suddenly in a lot of debt to Tucker, right?
Right.
And he went on his toes. And Tucker said to me, find him and bring him to my house and we'll sort it out, right? So I did. After the raid, he was never ever going to make the money he'd promised Tucker in rent.
Right.
So he's getting deeper and deeper in debt, right? So Tucker went, I've got these pills. I think there was a 500 or 1,000. He said, everyone who takes them says they get really bad headaches.
Right.
He said, but sell them in Raquel's and that'll help reduce your debt.
Right.
He give them at a reduced rate. And they're the pills what she took.
Right, so they were obviously bad.
They were obviously bad, yeah.
I suppose that's the problem with drugs, isn't it? When you're buying anything like that, you know, there's no...
Well, criminals make them,
but what I'm saying is, like, you know, in Amsterdam, a friend of mine went to a rave in Amsterdam and he said that they actually had testing stations. Where they could test whether it was okay or not. And I mean, obviously that is basically condoning, yeah, you can take drugs, but obviously if they'd have had something like that there, and obviously everyone knew what was going on, so like you said, the authorities, you know, like you said, if you've got 20,000 people in the field dancing, yeah, for 20 hours or whatever, they're obviously doing something. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah,
so
yeah.
That would have. But then I suppose, you know, nobody could be seen to condone it. But then after all these events happened, when did you sort of the club obviously then after that raid at Club UK? When did Raquel's actually shut the door?
Leah died about a week after she collapsed, roughly.
Right.
You know, I was saddened. I genuinely was. I felt for the girl. Any human being would be. It was awful. Seeing her father and her stepmother in bits like that on telly, you know, who wouldn't be moved? And I lived right by her at the time.
Right.
I'd moved out of Basildon, I was living near her. I went to work one night and I just said to my mate Gavin, the doorman, I said, I've had enough of this shit, do you know what I mean? So I went upstairs and said to the manager, I'm leaving. And apparently he danced after I'd left. And I just walked out,
right.
And that was it. And then
why would he have danced? I mean, it's just...
because he was Welsh, right? And
oh, right. I bet you give him some stick.
well, we used to tell him he wasn't allowed out of the office. He tried to scrap the rave nights, and he put on Martha Reeves and the Vandellas, right? And I'll come into work, and there was these black ladies sitting in the office, and I thought, no disrespect, I genuinely thought they were the cleaners, do you know what I mean?
Right.
And I went to him, can you get out of the office while I talk to him? And he's going, oh, this is Martha Reeves and the Vandellas. I'm fucking hell. So he was trying to turn it round, but it was never going to work, do you know what I mean?
I suppose really when it's been tainted with something as tragic as that.
No, this was before. He wanted to get rid of the raves.
Oh, right.
So when he first come, I wouldn't let him leave the office because he was always meddling. And
so he was probably happy, like, because
I was having a mood,
he wanted
because he was in charge again, he was the
Right,
actual manager again, But then they shut it straight after and renamed it Europa or something. But it only lasted a couple of weeks.
And then obviously after that period, what happened with you and sort of Tucker and stuff?
This is part of why I left, really. No, after work, I went to Southend, to a club in Southend, Adlib, where we used to go, where you filmed Origins, funny enough, to that club, or the one next up, or whatever. Right. And he was there with Tate and all that. So he went, I want a word with you. I went, oh yeah, what's this about? And he went, oh, Donna, this is like his 15-year-old girlfriend. He said, they've raided Pat's flat where she was living, and they've found some speed. One of the doormans grassed them up. And I goes, no, they ain't. Right. He goes, they have, I've got it. I said, Tony, I don't care what you say. No one's grassed her up, right? She's a walking advert for what they do. Right. So they've raided Pat's flat and they've found the gear. And he's going, well, a doorman's told me. I goes, well, who's the doorman? He's going, listen, it doesn't matter. I said, well, I'll tell you what, me and you go to his house tomorrow, right? And you tell him to tell me that one of the doormans grassed him up. And let's see what he says. He went, right then. And then I walked away and I thought, do I fucking need this shit? Do you know what I mean? Right. It's just getting ridiculous. They're all turning on each other, do you know what I mean? Right. Then when I went to work the next night, I thought, I can't be doing with this. He never contacted me the next day. Right. And I just thought, I can't be doing with this. And just walked out, do you know what I mean? But,
so I suppose really when you left Raquel's, and you all just sort of parted company and probably suited.
Well, no, he rang me up. And he went, you can't leave. I said, well, I've left. He said, you can't. And he got arsey, you're getting nutted. That was their favourite saying, you're getting nutted. I went, what, because I packed my job in? Think about it. You know what I mean? Right. I said, I'm going anyway in December. It's like November now, what's the problem? Right. You can't do that, you can't. People are talking, that's what he kept saying. I said, I don't care what fucking people are talking. So we sort of separated a bit of an argument. And then Tate and Rolfe went in. Raquel was looking for me. I don't know why, because I knew where I lived. Right. They had my phone number, they never rung me up. It's all show. That world's all show, do you know what I mean? We're looking for Bernie. And then, as I said, a few weeks later, they got shot, you know what I mean? Right. But I never moved. I never switched my phone up. I never changed my number. They never rang me.
You haven't mentioned, obviously, Carlton Leach at all. I know you and him have never seen eye to eye, but I mean, I was going to ask you. I mean, you know, obviously, he's always sort of maintained that he was very close to him, and he was, really good friendly with him. And you know, obviously, you wasn't really involved and blah blah. And obviously, from what you've said, you was in the centre of it.
I honestly don't know Carlton Leach. Right? I've met him maybe 6 times. Okay. And only in this context where I've gone in a club, and he's either on the door or he's with Tucker, and Tucker will go, all right, Bernie, this is Carlton, this is Bernie. Right. And another time it was Dave Dunn, and we've exchanged, but I've never sat down and had a conversation with him. I've never had any form of conversation with him. Right. It's a hello, goodbye, how are you, blah, 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 blah. That's it, right?
Why do you think he's got so upset, though? Because obviously, against you personally, because I know you've had that sort of, a bit of a sort of social media
I can't read his mind, but I think he's a very jealous person. he once took it to be his. Do you know what I mean? He's my friend. He's not your friend. It's sad, isn't it? But you know, that's what I think. I don't know, but it's the only thing I can think of because I've never done anything to him. But he's not so bad now. He probably will be when he hears this. But for about 2 years, he drove me and my children and my wife and family absolutely insane. It was like a daily thing, constantly. Do you know what I mean? Talking about my kids, me autistic kids, he called them. My kids are quite clever actually, and on about my wife, on about my son, on about all these things. Even my son's then girlfriend was adopting a child whose mother was an heroin addict, so she was going to take care of the child, and even that nearly got stopped because the authorities were aware that he was abusing her on the internet, and they were concerned that it would affect the thing. But he obviously didn't think of them things when he was saying them. And a lot of these people on the internet don't understand. It's like when people say to me, why don't you ignore them? Well, if I ignore them, they say I killed Leah Betts. They say I was somehow took a Tate and Rolfe. Imagine if I said nothing, it'd be ridiculous. And my kids go into a school and people say your dad's a murderer, your dad's a drug dealer, your dad's killed. That ain't right, you know what I mean? They'll never shut me up. And it got so ridiculous in the end that I started legal proceedings against Leach to have him injuncted, to have him shut up, right? And again, I never said anything about it, but he made a big deal of it in the internet. He's grassed me up, he's done, if you're going to go into grassing up and the ethics, the criminal ethics, which is a load of nonsense anyway, one, you don't abuse kids and women, which he'd broke, and you don't involve people's families, which he'd broke. So the rules were gone by the time I instigate these proceedings. And he's going, I'll fight him anywhere, I'll do this anywhere, I'll do that. The day I issued proceedings, he went to the doctors, right, and got a medical note and said he can't travel to Lincoln to the court case because he's got a bad leg, right? So he wouldn't come and face us in the court. And then his case against me was just ridiculous. He claimed that I'd had a bad reputation as an informant since the 1960s, right? I thought I was only born in 1960. And he actually named a guy called Maurice O'Mahony as me, because in the East End it had O'Mahony's, a grass on this railway bridge, and he was saying that was me. But it was a guy called Maurice O'Mahony who died in about, probably when I was 3 or something, do you know what I mean? And he didn't, all his facts were wrong.
Do you know something, though? I'm glad we're talking about this because obviously people don't, when people say things online and other people join in, obviously, like you said, you've kept a dignified silence, and then obviously you've said your bit, but then you get people going, well, why would he say it? It's got to be right, it's got to be this, it's got to be that. I think it's good to hear your side of the story.
Well, they threatened to dig my dead wife up. My wife died when she was 20. We got married. She was 26. 5 months later, healthy as anything, sitting watching telly like me and you are now, and she hadn't been to work because she felt a bit unwell. And she went, Bernie, I love you. I thought, oh God, she wants kids. Do you know what I mean? And she's going, I really love you. I thought, oh fuck, I'm in real trouble here. And then she went, and died. She had flu and she attacked her heart. She was 5 months after we'd been married. I buried her in a wedding dress. And then on the internet, they're saying they're going to dig her up. Do you know what I mean?
It's fucking disgusting. It's
disgusting. They don't realise that if you could get them in that moment when you've read it, what you would do to them, they don't realise it. It's just poison there, that internet is. But anyway, with Leach, he wanted his big day in court and he was going to show me what's what. I had to serve the papers on him on January the 6th, say, I can't remember the exact date. But I was ordered to do so over the Christmas period. But because of COVID and everything, to serve papers, I was representing myself. They have to go to the court and they have to be sealed. They have to have a little stamp on it. Then you can serve them. But I handed the papers in on time at the court, but they said, because of the backlog, because of COVID and Christmas, you ain't going to get them back in time. So I went, well, what am I going to do? I said, well, I'll have to email his solicitor all the paperwork and explained to him that I can't give you a sealed copy until I get it from the court. So I did that, and I asked him to acknowledge he'd received them, which he did, and then say January the 6th was the cut-off date.
Right.
On January the 6th, he went to the court and he said he hasn't served me with a sealed copy, and they had it thrown out.
Right.
So I didn't lose any court case.
Right.
They got out of the court case using a technicality.
Right, got it.
Because they'd have got smashed in the court. They didn't have a leg to stand on.
Yeah.
Everything in that paperwork was true, and everything in his paperwork was laughable. You know, that's how that ended.
Right.
But I'm happy to restart it if they want to restart abusing my family, you know.
Right, well, I mean, there's no cause for it, really. I mean, it should just be you know, move on.
Well, if someone's got a genuine problem with you, you ring them up and you say, look, I ain't happy what you've said there. And I go, well, I'm sorry. If you're wrong, you apologise. And if you go, well, actually, it's true. You say, well, actually, it's true. And you take it from there, didn't you? You didn't sit on the internet, you know, on your sperm-stained keyboard bashing away all night. Do you know what I mean?
Right. You've obviously become well known, not just as, you know, around that area and being, you know, one of the Essex Boys or being around the Essex Boys, whatever you want to say it. But obviously, when the actual murders happened, obviously, you know, the headlines were the media come up with the Essex Boys moniker, didn't they?
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you who actually did.
Right.
Jeff Pope,
right,
who wrote the Essex Boys film.
Right, that was him.
He's guilty of that, yeah.
Right, okay. I didn't know, because I remember seeing, I remember it vividly, there was like the Range Rover picture. It was on the front page of every paper, and I'm pretty sure it said Essex Boys Murdered or something like that. And
I don't think he'd come till Jeff made that film.
Really?
Because
okay. Maybe I'm...
My first book was called So This Is Ecstasy with a question mark.
Right.
And it was obviously about Leah Betts. Never mentioned the murders, that book didn't. And then publishers, being publishers, when the Essex Boy movie was coming out, they went, Bernie, we're going to change the cover of your book, we're going to rename it, and we're going to launch it again on the back of the film, right? Write a few more paragraphs, right? That's what they do, you know.
But that is a great question I wanted to ask you, Bernie. You know, so you've obviously been through this like crazy. I mean, you have had like a crazy life, and you've ended up all over the world doing these things, and obviously you've ended up in Essex and then been part of this whole kind of story, which has become like, I mean, you know, it's, if you speak to anybody, you know, it seems that in this country, the Krays and the Essex Boys were like the biggest criminals ever, you know, and it's actually quite funny because, you know, I'm sure at the time you probably would never, if I'd have said to you when this was happening, oh, Bernie, you know, there's going to be 20 films and 50 books, and this is going to become like it's just going to be going on and on in 20 years' time. You'd have probably gone, you know, you wouldn't have seen
about
it.
what, yeah.
So it's funny how it's gone. But what point did you actually get the inspiration to become a writer? Because obviously you've written some great books.
I was writing when I was at Raquel's. I've always written.
Right. Okay.
Because I left home when I was 16. I was in prison. I was in the army, and so I always wrote home to my mother, and so I'd always express myself by writing. You know, then daft letters to the thing. I used to write things about politics, and you know, when I was 17, I used to write about stuff like that and get it published in newspapers. So I've always enjoyed writing. So it wasn't new to me.
But your first book that got published was that one,
So This Is Ecstasy.
Right, okay.
Yeah.
And how many books have you written today?
About 20, I think.
Amazing. And which one's been the bestseller? Would it have been the
Salford.
Oh, Salford. Right,
Yeah,
okay.
by far.
And that was the story.
Paul Massey.
Paul Massey. Okay. Before we go on to that, obviously when we were talking about that book, and then you did do a book called Bonded by Blood, and obviously we obviously did a film together, and then you did Did you have a book called Essex Boys as well?
Yeah. That was the publisher.
Right.
I don't want to keep going on about it, but this is another one of Carlton's beefs. He said that they were the Essex Boys. Can you imagine Tony and me sitting around saying, what should we call our gang? We'll call it the Essex Boys. I've never... The title of the book was Essex Boys, right? Nowhere else in the book does it mention Essex Boys. Right. It's just the title to coincide with the film.
It's a good name, though.
I know it is, but Muscle, I think he mentions it 8 or 16 times that he's the Essex Boys. Right. But you, if you're a writer, right, you've got to have a tag You know, it's like the Krays, you know, the firm and,
Right.
you know, you can't keep saying me, Tony, Pat, Craig, but went to the shops.
Right.
So you have a collective name, do you know what I mean?
Right.
And so that worked well. So
And then
it's stuck. Do you know what I mean?
I remember, you know, you had the website. It was the Essex Boys website as well, was it?
Yeah, well, that came about because after the trial where Williams and Steele were convicted, John Williams came to me and said, look, I'm trying to get my brother out. You know all the characters and we need to speak to them. Will you help us? So I thought Tucker was threatening to shoot me and God knows what. Jack's done me a favour. They do you a favour, you got to do them a favour. So me and John started working together and we did really well at first, you know. We were getting witnesses to say things they shouldn't have said or didn't happen. And I went to Southampton to meet this Supergrass who alleged a load of things about Darren Nichols and it got him an appeal. So we were doing well, but eventually it died out. Right. And people will say to me, you said they were innocent, right? I knew they were guilty from day one, and me and John used to talk openly about them being guilty.
Right.
It was only been in public we said they were innocent. But, you know, you said they were innocent, now you're saying they're guilty. You say, listen, you don't marry the first girl you meet, you know what I mean?
Right.
You get in a relationship with her, you get to know her, and after 5 weeks, 5 years, 15 years, it's not working, you know, so it ends, right?
Right.
Relationships don't last forever, generally. You know, you have shit on your shoe, you wipe it off, don't you? You don't leave it on there. So my relationship with John ended when we couldn't go any further. Right. And it's been proven, since me and him fell out, they ain't done nothing. Right. They ain't going to do nothing because they're guilty, you know what I mean?
Everybody's always been like, you know, who was behind it, who did it, blah, blah, blah. And obviously there was recently a documentary on a
very
Sky.
bad documentary.
And they basically were saying that they've done new evidence and, you know, they could triangulate them nearby, but they couldn't put them at the spot and blah, blah, blah. I mean, did they do it or
100% they did.
Right, okay. So there's no shadow of a doubt.
No shadow of a doubt.
What I don't get is, right, you know, if you're, I mean, because did he do 20 years or 30 years? I mean, it's been a long
23,
time.
I think, Jack.
I mean, you'd think after 2015 and you couldn't do it anymore, at that point you'd have just gone, yeah, it was me, and get out.
That's what you thought, yeah.
I don't know why they kept...
That's what you'd have thought. But some people convince themselves, don't they? And other people have just lost causes, you know what I mean? And you've also got to remember all their witnesses. Right. Every one of their witnesses was a family member or a relative.
Right, okay.
Right? So maybe they think if I put my hands up and go, all right, we're guilty, they're throwing them under the bus, you know what I mean?
Right.
Because they all give evidence.
Yeah. I mean, I'm again, you know, it's always been a fascination for these sort of...
It's a load of rubbish, this. Right. There's no evidence. There's only the word of a super... No, there's not.
Right.
There's shitloads of evidence, right? I'll do it the other way around, right? Steele's alibi, right, is that he went to pick a trailer up from Bolton, which is near the halfway house in Essex. He took it home, then some people come to visit him to buy his house, and he spent the evening with them people. Easy enough alibi, right? So then the police look into it, right? His phone is picked up at Rettendon. Right, off the transmitters. He's going, oh yeah, that's because I was at Bolton. Well, that transmitter doesn't cover Bolton. Right. And his wife said, I was with him when he went to pick the trailer up. So they go to his wife, right, well, give evidence, because no, I'm not well, I can't do it, right? Like your wife would do, you know what I mean? So then they get the 3 people who he's meant to be in the house with, or 2 people he's meant to be in the house with, in the witness box, and they went, what day did you go around to look at the house? Right. I remember it really well. Well, when was it? It was December the 6th. Are you sure it was that day? Oh, not really. Well, why did you say it was December 6th? Because the solicitor told me to say that. Right. You know what I mean? And his case just went... Right. Jack Williams, where he was picking his car up from the car park near the murder scene. Right. Well, who told you to pick the car up? Well, his mate come in the yard at 2 o'clock and asked me to do it.
Right.
So he's travelled 60 miles from his house to your yard to ask you to pick up a car when he's got your phone number, but you can't say he's phoned you because there'd be phone records. Right. So you've got to say he's driven, right? So he's gone to your yard, asked you to pick the car up. You've gone, yeah, no problem. You've dragged a trailer from Suffolk on a dark night when it's snowing to pick someone's car up and take it back to Essex. Yeah. Well, the guy who you say come to the yard at 2 o'clock, he was at Heathrow Airport at 2 o'clock.
Right.
He made a phone call. We've got phone evidence.
Right.
He was in the car with Nichols, who were working at Sunbury-on-Thames.
Right.
Explain that. You know what I mean? I could go on forever, but the evidence against them is massive. It's not super gas evidence.
Right. Okay. Well, I mean that's obviously the narrative. But
listen, newspapers, right? Newspapers. It's easy for the newspaper to say there's a miscarriage of justice and get a double-page spread about how corrupt the police are and how dodgy things are because they can't be sued. The police aren't going to sue them. But how many newspapers, I can only think of two, well, it's the same newspaper, the Daily Mail, have ever gone, that person who's got away with that murder's guilty. They did it with the Stephen Lawrence thing, the Daily Mail, and they did it with the Taylor sisters, which I was involved with. And that's the only 2 times I've ever known them say, well, the guilty's got off. Do you know what I mean? Because they'll get sued to...
Right.
So the police are always the easy target. That's why miscarriages of justice are only the innocent.
Right.
Not the guilty getting off, it's the innocent. You know what I mean?
Right.
That's what they do. It's an easy...
Yeah.
It's an easy story, isn't it?
And your book that you said's been your best-selling book, the Paul Massey book. I haven't actually read it yet.
Yeah.
But, obviously,
great film.
I think everybody knows. Yeah. Everybody knows who he was, and I'd like to read that book actually.
It is a fascinating story, and he was a nice guy. Do you know what I mean? I got a lot of help with that book, which Salford's a very, 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 very strange place in regard to the media. They're a bit like Scarces. They don't talk to the media. They don't engage with journalists. So I was really fortunate that one of them comes for me, one of the main people, and said, look, we want this to be the true story. You know, will you do it? I went, yeah, no problem. So Paul's family, I knew Paul, I knew his wife, all the family were on board. But then greed crept in, do you know what I mean?
Right.
Why you get writing a book and we're not making no money and all the usual old stuff. So then they started this...
I think you should also, let people know that are listening and watching this podcast. People assume that because you've written a book that, you make millions of pounds out of it. So obviously, they probably think, you've made millions of pounds out of it. But the reality is you probably made a few thousand out of it, and that's... But people don't, see that.
There's no money in books. I write mine properly, right? I've never written a book in under a year, ever.
Right.
I'll go to the places to look at the places. I'll go and meet the people. I don't do nothing on the phone, you know what I mean? I was in Spain last year speaking to someone about a story. I'll go wherever to get it right, do you know what I mean? It's all in the detail, isn't it? I was going to Salford and I interviewed them all on tape, not because I don't trust them, but because I can't do shorthand, so I always say, we'll get it on tape, do you know what I mean? And then they all turned funny. I'll tell you why they turned funny. There was 2 gangs. There was the A team and the anti-A team. The anti-A team shot Paul, right?
Right.
And the A team were Paul's buddies.
Right.
So as I said, I always like to tell the full story. So I started speaking to the anti-A team. And the family went, what are you talking to them for? I went, well...
You need both sides.
You got to have both sides of the story. No. Anyway, they fell out with me over it. So then they started the internet campaign. He stole our book, he's ripped us off, he's this, he's that. Paul Ferris jumped on board, he's going to do this, going to do that. Writing poems about me, God knows what else he does. And Paul's brother John got in touch with a person who I'm close to, he's a family member as well, and said, what's this Bernie saying about my mother? He goes, what are you talking about? He said, I'm not going to repeat what they said, but it was a really serious allegation about Paul's mother, God rest her soul. And I said, there's no way on God's earth I'd write that in a book. Even if it's not true, but if it was, there's no way I would. One of the family had rung up Paul's wife and pretended to read an extract from my book saying, have you seen what he's written?
Right.
And it really upset his wife, and it really upset his brother. So when I interviewed the family, they said some absolutely horrendous things about Paul's wife, which again I won't repeat, and I don't believe they're true. So I was in a bit of a dilemma, and I thought, I don't want people thinking I've said that about his mother, God rest her soul, right? But I don't want to prove it's nonsense by revealing what they've said about his wife, do you know what I mean? So her brother, Paul's wife's brother, was a friend of mine, is a friend of mine. I said, listen, Stephen, I said, I'll give you the tape and I'll let you listen to it. And if you think your sister can listen to that, it's on your head. But I'd rather let them carry on abusing me than put the woman through that, do you know what I mean? Yeah. And the sister went, no, I want to hear it, I want to hear it. So she listened to it. They went their separate ways, that part of the family and that part of the family, and the internet abuse stopped immediately. But if they want to restart it, I will happily upload, now the wife's heard it, I will happily upload the recordings to the internet, which I don't think they would want in a million years, because it was so disgusting what they said.
It's tough your job, Ben, isn't it? Because obviously you're obviously
it's difficult
to trying to earn a living as a writer and tell these stories that are fascinating. And obviously when you do it, I suppose you can't keep everyone happy.
It's like Paul Ferris. I got on all right with him at first when I met him, and we'd done a TV programme with him, and he sat there and he told about the murder of his friends. Well, fine, you know what I mean? And then he alleged that this guy had set him up. And so for the next programme, I thought, right, we've got to get that guy on and let him have his say. Right. You're accusing the guy of like a double murder, do you know what I mean? He's got family, he's got wife, he's got children. You can't just leave it at that he's guilty of this murder, you know what I mean? So he's come on. And when Paul found out I'd interviewed him, what you got him on there for? He's a grass, he's here. And then he turned on me. Right. It's that kind of world, you know what I mean? Right. They want it all their own way, and they don't want to hear the bad news, the truth.
I think as a writer, though, you have to.
You can't
be
do
balanced.
that.
You can't
say to a bloke, "You've murdered 2 people on national television," and not let him reply. You can't do it. You know what I mean? That's destroying a man's life. His job, his boss might watch it. His neighbour might watch it, or his wife goes to the school gates with the kids, and all the other parents are hiding up the other end of the playground. Do you know what I mean? Right. You can't do that to people. Yeah. That ain't right, you know what I mean?
And I was going to ask you as well, you're 63 years of age now. What have you got coming up, Bernie? You must have another book you're working on, or are you having a break?
No, I've always got 5 or 6 books on the go. I've got fed up arguing with these conspiracy theorists on the internet. Right. So I thought I'll write the ultimate Essex book, what tells every story, right, and it deals with every conspiracy theory.
Right, okay.
And it started off as one book, and at the moment, it's now 500,000 words I've written, right?
Wow.
So I can't get them all in the book that thick. So I'm releasing it as one, but it's 4 books. Wow. I'm nearly finished that, and then I want to wash my hands of Essex.
Right.
There's a lad in Durham whose sister got involved with this guy, and Julie Patterson, her name was. He was a bit of a nutter who was obsessed with serial killers, and he strangled her and chopped up into all little bits and claimed that he'd eaten her, right, or ate parts of her body with garlic and stuff. I don't believe him. And they've never found a body. So that's a really sad story, because a boyfriend went into prison to kill him and ended up sent to the wrong prison and ended up hanging himself. And the whole family, ever since, the kids are all locked up. The whole family's just ruined generations of their family. And I can't really say about the other one, because I've agreed to write a book about a fella who's well known, who's been accused of he's been on trial for various murders, and he doesn't want it released till he's dead, because he's going to tell the truth in this book about what happened. But he don't want it released till he's dead.
Be good to get him on the podcast, but we won't have his broadcast it. We can ring him up and go, we could do it now.
So that's fascinating. But he's a major guy and a lovely fella. But I think he's going to outlive me. I keep saying to him, fucking hell, you're 90 and there, come on. You know what I mean?
But I mean, that sounds really exciting, Ben. I mean, it's good that you've got loads of things going on.
Yeah, always, yeah.
No doubt some of these books will end up becoming movies again. Yeah, I mean, you've had 2 now.
I love writing them, but I can't be bothered promoting them. I wrote a book called Perpetual Insanity about a year ago. And I don't think it's sold anything. I've never advertised it once. Once it's out there,
right, it's done.
I forget about it, which is a bit crap, really. And I did a book with Nipper Ellis, the guy who claimed his dad murdered the Essex Boys.
Right.
I wrote his book and he went, he thought he was going to make thousands, you know what I mean? And he said, I need money for fertility treatment. So I went, all right, well, you can have all the advance, you know what I mean? And I give him all the advance and he took it and then he slagged me off for ripping him off. But I never got a penny out of that book. Well, I like writing them, but I'm not interested in the other side because there is no money in them.
Right.
The last thing I'll say here, this is a common theme amongst these gangsters. When they're in their environment, what they say goes, and they believe that they are some sort of authority and wise guy and all the rest of it. But when they leave that world and then start dealing with businessmen, they get absolutely slaughtered because they're not nowhere near as clever as they thought they was. You know, I know Carlton had issues about his money from Rise of the Foot Soldier, but he signed the contract, do you know what I mean?
Do you know what it is? I think the problem is, if you've written a book and you sell the book, right, and you get paid for the book, you know, you've been paid.
That's
right?
it, yeah.
But the thing is, obviously, you know, nobody knew when they made Rise of the Foot Soldier 1 that there was going to be 6 movies. Nobody knew that, right? If they did, then maybe Carlton would have said, well, I want to be in all of them and I want to be paid every time there's a film made and I want this and I want that. But we didn't expect there to be any more. We just thought it was a one-off movie. And I'm sure he didn't think there was going to be any more. But it's like you can't go back and change history. So if I signed a contract with you and I said, I'm going to pay you this much money for this thing, and then something else happened, you can't come back and go, well, actually, can we just change that contract because I don't like it now? And it's like, you know, if anybody pays me any money to do something, I always take it thinking I'm getting paid money to do this, and I might get some more, I might not get some more. It might be a success, it might not be a success. But if it isn't a success, I don't cry about it. And if it is a success, I don't cry about it because I've agreed to that. Do you know what I mean?
Well, what happened with me, this photographer, Brian Anderson from Glasgow, came to me and said, I want to do these big black and white photos of all these villains before they die, you know.
I think I saw that.
It's a
great book.
It's a beautiful
coffee table book.
And I knew how I wanted it to be. And so I'd sold an house and I was invested 20,500 quid in this book, right?
Right.
And the deal with me and Brian was we had 50-50 of the profit, right?
Right.
So it's a beautiful book, right? It's really classy book, right? It's not crap print paper or anything. It's beautiful, right? So I paid the 20,500. When it comes to the country out, because I flew to China to get it made, right? And I'm sat with these Chinese people in these warehouses getting it made. And then I come back and they had to pay three grand some sort of import money, right? And then I had to store it. These 13 pallets of books had to be stored. Every time I sold one, I had to buy £2 worth of packaging, £10 recorded delivery.
Right.
But every time he saw a book being sold, he's thinking, there were 50 quid, right? He's thinking 25 for me, 25 for him.
Right.
And so it got to the end and it wasn't a book what would ever mass sell, right? We were naive, right? And there was 2,700 books left or something. And I said to Brian, I can't pay the storage no more because Amazon will start at 50, they'll drop it to 25. They're selling it for a tenner in the end. Right. It costs more than that to post.
Right.
Do you know what I mean? So I said, you can have all the books, right? If you can do something with them, have them. So he got in touch with them and he too slow and they pulped them, right? So then he started saying, I never got no money out of that. I said, Brian, I've got a list of everyone who bought the book, right? Everybody. We'd done Faces 2 and it was all finished, just had to be printed. I said, we'll get, say there's 2,000 people bought the book. we'll get 2,500 printed or 2,000 something printed, right? And all that's profit because I've spent all the... No, and you got Paul Ferris involved and you've robbed me, you've nicked all this money off me. I'm going, have you got any idea how much money I've lost? Do you know what I mean? But that's how they think. They've got no brains, you know what I mean? They're going, you sold it for 50, you owe me 25, you know what I mean? Right. No. So in the end, I went, I'll tell you what, Brian, forget Faces 2, I'd sooner throw it in the bin and I don't want to give you a penny, you know what I mean? Right. So I just scrapped it, which is a shame, really, because it's a great book, you know what I mean?
So anybody that wants to find out what books you've got coming out, Bernard, or... you know, they want to keep up to date with what you're doing. Where can they find you?
Ask people on the internet because they know more about my life than I do.
You must have. You're on Facebook.
Just Facebook, yeah. So. Or Amazon. Okay. Amazon's good. Yeah.
Amazing.
But there's some great books on there. Some great stories. People like Wayne Barker, who probably no one's ever heard of. Lou Yates and old guys like that. Great stories. You know what I mean? Hateland's a great book, I think.
Right.
And the Essex ones are probably the worst, to be honest. It's all crash, bang, wallop. You know, there's no... You don't really get to know the people in them because they're drugged out their brains all the time. Right.
Well, Bernie, I really appreciate you coming on the podcast and popping your cherry with the Criminal Connection podcast.
This is the first and the last.
Was it really that bad?
No, not at all, no. But, you know... They're not my thing, but as it was you, I can't resist.
Thanks for watching and listening to the first episode of the Criminal Connection podcast. We'll be back next week. Make sure you go on our socials @Criminal Connection Podcast. Make sure you like and subscribe.